So AI systems are only as good as the data that they are trained on, and the data that AI has been given to work with. So if our information environments are fragmented and inconsistent and ungoverned, and many of them are, then AI doesn't solve that problem. It actually scales it. So if it's using the bad data and unstructured data, it's not going to give you good results. It actually makes it, harder to, if we keep going down that line, it makes it harder to recover from that. But we're doing that, a lot of the industry is now using this structured data and structured information. That gives AI a really good basis to start coming up with some really good results.
Hi, just a quick one. If you're enjoying the podcast, don't forget to subscribe or follow us on your favorite podcast app or on YouTube. It really helps us share practical knowledge with more people. And if you want deeper insight, you can also subscribe to our newsletter at digitalconstructionpodcast.com. All right, let's jump in. Hi, Eric. Welcome to the Digital Construction Podcast.
Yeah, good morning, Andrea. Nice to talk to you.
So in this episode, we sit down with Eric Bugeja. He's the chairperson of buildingSMART Australasia. He's a member of the board at buildingSMART International. He's a director there. I'm very excited for this episode. Eric also runs his own business, which is focused on consulting and training, and it's called Kephron. He worked in large design and construction firms. He started his career as a mechanical engineer, and there is also an interesting story that I'm very excited he can share with us about the beginning of his career. But he's always, now at the moment, he's busy working on open standards and trying to adopt technologies to drive efficiency and supporting the global community. So I'm very excited for this episode, Eric, and thanks for joining us today on this episode of the Digital Construction Podcast. Before we start, I have a question that I ask everyone because I think it's a great opportunity to share a few life lessons. And what is the best advice you've ever received in your career?
Oh, that's a tough question. There's been lots of advice. I think the best thing that I've been told is, well, firstly, always act with integrity. And if you really believe in something, that you keep following it, right? So you just always act with integrity. But more importantly, and I think that's something that not everybody does, is just try new things. Like, don't be scared to try new things. Just have a go. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work, and just keep trying again. But and I guess that's partly, sort of relates to what I try to do with people, is to just tell them to have a go. Don't be scared of the technology. Have a go. And that's something I've done my whole life. If I see something new, I'll just give it a try. If it fails, it fails. If it doesn't, it doesn't. But I've learned something new. So that's the piece of advice I would give, is just keep trying and don't be scared to try new things.
Yeah, I love it. Love it. And you have a very interesting story about the beginning of your career when you were sitting with your boss in his 60s and you were a graduate mechanical engineer. Can you share with us what happened? And
Yeah, I had a bit of an unusual start to my career as a young mechanical engineer. I ended up leaving uni and working with I say old, but I don't see him as old now because I'm almost close to the same age. But he was a very experienced engineer in his 60s, a Dutch engineer, traveled the world. And one thing he said to me, which was quite unusual, is, I will teach you about engineering, but you teach me about the technology. You tell me how we can do things better. And at the time, I did not realize that was quite an unusual experience for a graduate, to come in and actually try and, teach and learn both ways. So we were a two-man company, so I was just given complete flexibility to go and look at technologies and how we could do things better. And he just taught me about all disciplines of engineering. So I became quite rounded in what I'd learned. But when I then moved when I left him and went to a larger firm, I found that that's not how other engineers experienced it. You come into an organization and you get told, this is the way we do things. We've been doing it like this for a long time, and you must comply and do it that way. And I just never accepted that, I guess, because of what I'd learned and how we'd adapted. And I do hope, and I know when I have engineers work with me in the past, I've tried to learn from them. So I think that's an important message, that, learning can go both ways. We can learn from young people, young graduates, in terms of the technology and how they do things, but they can learn from our experience. So yeah, it was and I remember just on that, when I did join a larger company, and I started using computers and software and 3D design software particularly. I would get told as an engineer that that's not my role. Your job is not to use computers and software. Your job's to sketch stuff, work out the calculations, and give it to a drafter. And I tried to explain, well, this software is actually engineering design software. It's not drafting software that I'm using. This is how I do my design. And just one very quick example, I was asked to design and to automate a production line, and I had 2 weeks to do the work. And I used some 3D design software. Well, I started using 2D CAD to try and design it, and it was taking way too long. So I won't say how I got the software, but I got a particular piece of 3D design software, had the design done in 2 days, went to my boss, and my boss basically said to me, you can't submit this because we've allowed 2 weeks to do the work, and that's what we're charging for. And that just gave me an indication, right, of the efficiency and how we run as an organization. And here we are in 2026, and we probably still have some of those attitudes.
Yeah, that's so true. That's so true. Even in previous podcasts with other people, one of the challenges is in this industry is how the job is procured. Like, people are expecting to spend time and then at the same time trying to optimize time, which is a bit, yeah. You started your career, as you said, like designing physical machinery, but how did you end up leading multidisciplinary BIM team, and how did you make this transition, and what was the hardest part of that shift?
I guess I'm the sort of person which is more of a generalist. I don't like to stick with one thing. I want to know a little bit about everything. So I was working in manufacturing automation, and I joined a consultancy where I was the technical lead, mainly in food processing area. But I guess I always had that background in trying to adapt technology just through the automation stuff I was doing as well. And just by luck, I ended up leading a industry and resources team, which was specialized across multiple areas. And then because of my knowledge of some of the technology, I started working to bring together an architectural and building engineering team to get them to collaborate better. And that's where BIM really became the catalyst to help with that collaboration between the engineers and the architects. So having a team where I could control that a little bit, and we all aligned in the way we worked, and we just saw the efficiency gain that we had by bringing that together. I made a choice at that point to give up a management role of the team and the project director work I was doing on transport projects to focus. I just saw the massive opportunity around particularly the adoption of BIM, not just the 3D modeling side, but just the efficiency gain. So I gave up that role, took up a role within that organization to develop strategy for the company. And that's where my career ended up going. So then worked for a large construction company, basically doing a similar thing, where trying to understand requirements and trying to drive the efficiency, not just from 3D modeling, but just from good structured data and how that all comes together in collaboration. Like that example I gave to you from my very early days, trying to take that onto the large scale. This is something that we should have been doing for a long time. And it's just almost obvious to an extent the efficiency gain that we can unlock, and we're still almost struggling as an industry to still question the value, and I think we're now beyond that question. So yeah, the transition just sort of happened by a little bit by accident, but because this was always a passion for mine. I've always had a passion for technology and adapting technology since I was a little kid. So yeah, when I graduated, IT was something new, or information technology was something new. I went into engineering, but I still always had that passion for technology. And here I am now, trying to drive it into the industry.
It's exciting. And we mentioned already that you are the chairperson of buildingSMART Australasia. You're also director of buildingSMART International. And I'm sure many of the listeners are already familiar with what buildingSMART is. But I think not everybody understands the structure of buildingSMART International, its regional chapters, and how Australasia fits in the global picture. the no-profit ethos, but for somebody hearing the names buildingSMART for the first time, how would you explain what it does and why it exists?
So buildingSMART's been around since probably the late 90s. I think it's late 90s, but it was actually formed by a lot of software vendors coming together, and there was a demand in the industry to basically have information shared. So what buildingSMART does, we create the open standards that allows for information to be shared across multiple software vendor platforms. So it's an open, most people would have heard of IFC. IFC is one of our open standards. We have other open standards, which we won't go into detail, like IDS for information requirements and BCF for managing issues. But the whole ethos is just around collaboration and not being locked into any one vendor solution, and allowing information to move across the life cycle of a project. There's certain software or vendors that are focused on this particular phase of a project and others another phase, but the whole ethos around BIM, digital engineering, good information management, is for information to travel through the life cycle. So buildingSMART was formed basically to develop the open standard, which are ISO standards and available to everyone. It allows anyone who gets a file, if it's an IFC file, to have always have access to that file. So in 30 years' time, you basically could open that file. You don't need a certain version of the software to get access to the information. It describes the 3D geometry, but also, more importantly, the structured information that goes with it. That can be fed into databases, can be fed into asset management systems, can be fed into multiple areas. So one thing that buildingSMART does is the open standards. But the other thing we do across the world is to advocate for BIM, for digital engineering, but more importantly, just good information management. So that's what we do in each of the countries. So we're made up of multiple chapters. There's 40 chapters at the moment around the world, and we're growing. BSI, buildingSMART International, is the sort of central office that sort of manages. And we develop as a community these open standards, which then become ISO standards. But yeah, what we do in each country, we advocate, we try to bring people together, we work across all the industry groups, we work very closely with government. So buildingSMART works closely with government around the world, trying to demonstrate, particularly to government, the importance of having open standards. So if an engineer or a constructor is working in one state, say in New South Wales, and then they want to go work in another state, doesn't matter what software solution they're using, they can still work on that project, and information can be shared across the project. So that's part of what we're trying to do, is demonstrate the importance of open standards. And the open standards aren't perfect, right? There are challenges with utilizing open standards, but it's important as an industry that we keep pushing the need for open standards, and we make them work, and we utilize them the way they're meant to be. I think, to be in a world that doesn't have open standards would be very challenging. And if you think about an architect trying to work in one software package, trying to work with another engineer who's working in another software package, and we're trying to do collaboration and clash detection and bring stuff together, would be very challenging without the open standards. So they are important. So hopefully that gives you a bit of an overview of who buildingSMART is and what we do. So we're not just about the open standards, but we're also about advocating the transformation of the industry. Yeah,
definitely. And I think many of the listeners now understand what buildingSMART is. I think that we have a great opportunity to speak to you, understand what a chairperson actually does at buildingSMART. On your day-to-day activity, can you share that with us?
Yeah, and I must say, buildingSMART's my voluntary role. Everyone, the majority of people who work within the community do it on a voluntary basis. So as part of buildingSMART Australasia, we're a chapter. We get together regularly, and we look at how we can do things like events, how we can educate the community. But we also, for example, we run working groups now. That's something we're trying to drive more of now. So we have working groups in linear infrastructure. We've developed a working group which we're starting up in airports, for example. And what that allows us to do is to bring, so for example, if we take airports, we bring airports from around Australia and New Zealand together to look at how open standards work with airports. And if something is deficient there or doesn't work, we can feed that back to buildingSMART International, so the standard can evolve to meet the requirements. Same with linear infrastructure for road and rail and bridge. The working group gets together, they learn from each other how to use the open standards properly and workarounds and challenges, but they also then get to feed back to buildingSMART International, so the standard improves. So that's the main things we do in Australia, and we're trying to do more of that, and we are doing more of that now, is running working groups, running events, running webinars. We just had our exchange conference last week, in Brisbane. And we had a lot of good feedback from that conference, because there aren't many events in Australia, particularly, where people can talk technical. So some of the feedback we got back is we loved having an event where we can have technical discussion, and we loved having an event where it's not just about people selling stuff or saying how good things are, but it's also about people talking about the challenges and how we solve the challenges and how we move the industry forward. So that was last week. We will hold one up. We do that annually, and we're going to run some more regional events as well. We're looking to run one in New Zealand at the end of the year as well. But I just recommend people to get involved with buildingSMART. Like, we're a community, right? We're a voluntary community, we're an industry group, and you get to solve problems outside of projects, which sometimes it's hard to solve problems on projects under the pressure of a project. So our working groups are made up of government, vendors, designers, universities, where we come together to try and solve problems. So I've just put it out there to the community, is become a paid member of buildingSMART and get involved. You could become a free member, but I'd say become a paid member, and then you can get involved with some of these working groups as well, and get involved with the community.
That's exciting. And you touched on this briefly before, about the role of the vendors and the fact that we may live in if we didn't have buildingSMART, we may live in a world where we only have vendors and there is no open standards. In that world, what do you think will actually break for the engineering practices or the asset owners? What can possibly go wrong? I know it may be obvious, but I think it's good. It's a good idea to explain it like pretty directly. And why do you think also many organizations still tolerate this vendor locked in, despite like the long-term cost of that decision?
Yeah, well, in terms of what can go wrong, I think it's more about making sure we're as open as possible. Like, the challenge you have in any industry is, if one or two vendors, become prominent, and we rely on that particular format or that particular vendor, what happens if something happens to that vendor, right? And all of a sudden they no longer make that software, or they go broke, or they go bankrupt, or we end up in a situation where that vendor can then just charge whatever they want for their software because they have a monopoly. So this is one of the challenges in the world that, I think most companies realize that now. And I know companies I've worked for, we've made it clear that if any software that we adopt must be open. We must have access, not necessarily open from a buildingSMART perspective, but just open in terms of the access to the data. We don't want that data to be locked into that software, so we are then tied to that software vendor forever. Because again, what happens if something happens to that vendor and they no longer exist? Then we're stuck, right? We can't get access to our software. It's a big cost to try and get it out of there and into other systems. So I think all of us, and from a vendor perspective, the vendors, like from a buildingSMART side, they make up buildingSMART. They're all very supportive. We have vendors sitting on our board. They're part of our strategic advisory council. It's all of us working together, because the vendors know that this is what the industry wants, and they are supportive in this sort of, because they know that that's what the clients want, right? They want to not be locked in. I think we've moved away from the old days. Back in the 70s and the 80s, you'd go and get these big systems that you basically stuck with that system for 20 or 30 years, and your data's locked away. So I think that is probably going to be, I think that's what the industry has realized now, that you create a competitive environment, both for the people doing the work and the software that you're using within your company, and you can adapt, right? If that all of a sudden that software vendor decides to charge you 4 times the price, you've got options to go to somewhere else. So it just makes it an even playing field for the industry, for people working and people providing the software.
And one of the key outcome of the work that is led by buildingSMART is these IFC files that now has been around for a while. Yeah. And many people love them. Many people may feel a little bit frustrated around this file format. where do you think things can go wrong, or things what's the best way to use it, I guess? Because sometimes, like the issue is it's basically the user that doesn't necessarily know how to use it. It's not a straightforward process. So also, can you share with us a little bit about the future of these IFC files?
Yeah, and you're exactly right. It comes down to understanding the limitations, right? IFC or open standards is not the solution to do everything, and I think people need to understand the limitations of what it can and can't do, and also I think one problem we've had is just the education on how to utilize it properly. So, as an example, a client will just say, "Give us an IFC file," with no real information. So the designer, or particularly the designer, will just go into their software and hit export IFC, thinking that they've just done their job, and you end up with this massive file that has everything in it. It's too large, it's not manageable. So it's very important to understand how IFC works, and provide, I guess, instruction on what do you actually need from that IFC file. So you don't necessarily need 1,000 attributes or 100 attributes, and you don't necessarily need the detail and geometry. So you don't need everything handed over. So it's up to the client to actually train. And we did this when I was working with a construction company. We would actually say to our designers, "This is how we want you to export the IFC. We just need these parameters. We need it done this particular way," because then it serves the purpose that we need. Or else it just becomes unmanageable. And I think that's been the frustration in the industry. People have just not understood the limitations of it, both from a geometry and a data perspective, and how to utilize it properly. And that's something we just need to help with. In terms of the future, we're moving away from file-based transmission of data. We all know that. It will continue for a little while forward, but the world is changing, right? We're moving towards this connected, cloud-based environment where information doesn't just get sent in a file, it just gets accessed. Like, that's what we're going towards. So you could have a design model and an asset register and a GIS system, but they're not three separate things that need to be then reconciled with each other. They're just three views of the same data. So this is what we've been trying to do for a long time, is that the data is the data, and the way we access that data could be from multiple systems. So BIM, for example, the 3D model is one visual way to access the data, but you could also access from a GIS, you could access from a database, you could access from an asset management system, but we want to connect the data. Now, this means we're going to move away from file-based transmission. So there's nothing to say that you can't just transmit a little bit of what's in a file to that person, and another bit to another person, another bit to another person. So the next generation of IFC, that's what's being considered, is the move towards cloud-based, AI-capable, modularized, connected data, not necessarily just file-based transmission of data, because we all know we've moved on from that. We've got APIs, we've got connected systems. So that's something that buildingSMART is now working on, is the next generation of open standards that moves away from file-based, fixed, packets of information that just gets sent as a file. So yeah, that's quite exciting, right? Because I think that's what the industry needs, and some of the biggest excitement we have is around the next generation of standards that we're developing.
How do you find in this conversation about moving from file-based to cloud-based data a difficult conversation to have inside the buildingSMART community, or everybody's on board? Because usually when you have communities, there is a lot of different opinions, I guess. Yeah,
and it's always going to be a challenge, right? Because we've built a lot of systems based on the standards that we've developed, and those systems will continue. So from a buildingSMART perspective, it's important that we continue to maintain a lot of our existing standards and keep working on those, because they will be necessary for a long time to come. But at the same time, we need to look at the future and the transition to the future. So, and this is like across the world, right? Everyone has different needs and different priorities. But what we need to do is to listen to the broad community across the world and make sure that we're servicing both. So we're servicing the existing and maintaining that, but we're also servicing the future. in terms of how we prioritize that, that comes down to the community, right? That's like with anything in any democracy, is what's more important, and both are important. We need to keep maintaining our existing standards, but just as important, we need to look at the future. And we rely on a community to develop those standards as well. Like a lot of the work that's done in buildingSMART is done voluntarily. So we need to make sure that we're utilizing that, and we have the buy-in of the broad community in terms of what we do. And that's what we are. We're an industry association, so we need to listen to the industry and understand what they need, what the industry needs going forward.
And while we're talking about data, I think it's probably the right time to talk about AI as well. Like AI can access unstructured data, but buildingSMART is saying, no, we want to make sure we keep on providing structured data. I think it's still probably a good idea to do that, because AI can still benefit from the structure that the buildingSMART and IFC files and all of the open standard can provide. But I think an interesting aspect is the debate that you propose around the difference between Iron Man and Terminator when it comes down to AI, and how engineers should feel about this transition. Can you share with us that vision?
Yeah, so from an AI perspective, and as we all know, this is, from an industry, this is, and I've only come to realize myself, who's someone who's been in technology impact, and even for me, who someone who dabbles with technology for many, many years, seeing what AI can do now is even blowing me away. I'm like shocked at what it can do. But for our sector, we've been talking for 20-something years about good information management. The principles are not new for us. So structured data, consistent classification, governed workflows, ownership of information. So, we've built an entire standards framework around those ideas. I guess the challenge is that, we've always had challenges implementing it, and AI doesn't care about, how long it's going to take us to try and implement. So AI systems are only as good as the data that they are trained on, and the data that AI has been given to work with. So if our information environments are fragmented and inconsistent and ungoverned, and many of them are, then AI doesn't solve that problem. It actually scales it. So if it's using the bad data and unstructured data, it's not going to give you good results. It actually makes it, harder to, if we keep going down that line, it makes it harder to recover from that. But we're doing that, a lot of the industry is now using this structured data and structured information. That gives AI a really good basis to start coming up with some really good results. One of the challenges we've had, particularly in the construction industry, we don't report really well when things don't go well. So any AI looking at the historical data will just think that program that we used must have been a good program, so let's just keep doing that. But if that program was never updated with what actually happened on that project, the AI is going to think that's the best way to go and run that construction program again, as one example. So having structured data as an underlying basis for AI puts us as an industry in a pretty powerful position, better than some other sectors. If we continue to use IFC and some of these structured schemas, AI knows exactly what things are. Like, that's a door and that's a window. We know, all that information is known. The AI is going to give us some really good results and provides us with a really good basis to utilize AI going forward. So stuff like, triaging clash detection and developing programs automatically and really giving us live digital twins with live data that's feeding into this structured data. It provides a very good basis and foundation for AI giving us good results, and we're doing it, right? I've been working with companies where we are now utilizing AI. I'm doing it myself to really drive efficiency. So that question around the Iron Man versus Terminator scenario, I think I spoke to you about this before. 10 years ago, I presented something about the future of the engineer, and you could see it as two ways. You could see AI as the Terminator that's going to take all our jobs and replace us all. But the smart people, and this is my perception, is the Iron Man scenario, that we are using this technology to enhance us and make us, have superpowers. So an engineer that used to take 3 months to do a particular job can now do that job in 2 days or 3 days or 4 days, which allows us to do more. And it doesn't mean the work's going to go away, because we've been limited by how fast we can work as an industry. And we've been complaining for years that we can't build the infrastructure that we've needed to build because we just don't have the resources. So now that our resources can work at 5 times the pace with the assistance of AI, it means we can do a lot more. But the people who are going to maintain their jobs are the people who are going to embrace it. The people who are not going to embrace it are not going to be as efficient and not going to be as needed by the industry. So the advice is to embrace it. It makes your life easier. It stops you doing things that most of us hate doing. And AI just allows us to focus on the really interesting stuff, good design and focusing on the construction and all that sort of stuff. So I find it exciting. For me, I don't see it as a threat. I see it as something I can really focus on, in making sure I focus on the stuff I love to do, not the boring administrative running of some people love like running macros and entering data and all that sort of stuff. But for me, it's exciting. It just, as an engineer, you can just focus on the good stuff, the exciting stuff.
Yeah, and you speaking about engineers and the people working in this industry, you touched on this a little bit at the beginning when you mentioned that there are some engineers that still believe that their job is to just sketch, calculate, and hand off the work to a draft person. Why do you think this mindset survived so far, and what can we do to change it?
It's a good question. Like, I don't know. I think you just don't know what you don't know, right? So, and I found throughout my career, so when those workflows have been in place, and I've had an engineer in my team that sort of almost refused to go down the, whether it's the BIM side of things, the moving away from just sketching and handing off, and any engineer who's transitioned out of that never goes back. You ask any of them, would you go back to doing it the way you were doing it before? And a majority of them said, well, there's no way in the world. Even the more senior engineers who are in their 60s and 70s sometimes, who are very resistant, once they see that, exactly what I said before, that they can now focus on the design and not the drafting and the administrative side and the data entry side of their projects, they get excited almost and say, no, like, this is now unlocked that the perspective that now I can now spend my time focused on design, not on drawings and outputs, and the fact that the software, a lot of the engineering software, just allows you to check things and validate things, in such an efficient way that you become a much better engineer. You're not waiting for a set of drawings to come back and then someone else to produce a set of drawings, and this old-fashioned way we used to sit around the table and hand drawings to each other to check for clashes, and we miss clashes because we can't see in the 3 dimensions unless you're very experienced. That all goes away, and we become better engineers with better designs. We can, in the same time, we can go through thousands of iterations of a design rather than 3. So of course we're going to come out with better options and better designs. So once people just don't know what they don't know, once they see and they experience this way of working, the majority of them will never go back. And I've seen that happen many, many times. It takes a lot of effort to show everybody what's possible. And I would have thought by now that we would have had more of the industry working that way. And to be honest, in Australia and New Zealand, that transition has happened. There's a lot of projects and a lot of government agencies who are doing, if you went to our exchange conference last week, you would have seen a lot of government agencies who are doing some really good stuff on projects. So it's happening. But yeah, it's not an easy question to answer why. I think it's fear. Part of it's just fear of the unknown. If you've been doing something the same way for 20 or 30 years, it's difficult to go and say, to do it, do something differently. That's for all of us, right? Something you're familiar with. And the first time you do it, it's going to be tough, right? Because it's different. And when you're under pressure for a project, it's hard to go and do something different where you don't trust, because trust is the other thing as well. Trust and fear. If you don't trust that way of working, you don't want to do it on a project because you're under pressure to perform.
Definitely. And you've been a pioneer in this space, and back in the day when you started your career, but you've also done a lot, and you're still doing a lot for the community on the training and upskilling the future workforce side. Can you share with us what you're working on the training side?
Yeah, so on the training side, and I spent time developing training for construction engineers, but where I think the gap is at the moment is the executive level. And I think this comes down to what we were talking about before. So executive level training. So at the moment, I'm working on putting together training that's more focused, like even at the CEO level of a company. So there's an awareness of what this is all about, because I think this is where we've been held back, where people at a certain level, middle management, and the people on the ground can see the benefits, but it doesn't work its way up to the top. So whenever there's requests for funding or approval of a business plan, it gets stopped at that level. So at the moment, I'm putting together a short program, 3 or 4 hour program at an executive level that just explains what this whole information management, BIM, digital engineering, AI, technology transition is all about. So we get that final bit, because that final level to get buy-in, and then we can move forward, because I think that's where a lot of this transition is being stopped, and it just comes down to a lack of awareness or understanding. This is not about a piece of software that we're trying to implement. It's about a completely different way of working that unlocks a lot of efficiency in the way we design, construct, and handover. But the biggest challenge is everybody needs to get on board. And if one or two parties don't get on board across the life cycle or get engaged early, as we all know, it just doesn't work. It falls apart. So that's what I'm working on at the moment, is just how I get the message over to that executive level, that to give them an understanding of what this is all about, to help take us forward.
Yeah, very exciting to see the evolution of this, and I'll keep an eye on it. I don't really want to miss an opportunity to speak to understand your opinion about VR and AR, because you've been leading teams for very large firms, and I just want to know, where do you see the real value showing up on projects today for these technologies?
Yeah, I think there's a whole heap of technologies, right? So a lot of these technologies at the core rely on having data available, right? So VR and AR is almost useless unless you've got some 3D models that are accurate enough that they can work in that environment. So I did spend a few years working with a team that was developing a lot of VR and AR solutions for training, like for emergency services, for example, to be able to rehearse scenarios in that space. We were adapting that to construction, because it's similar in construction. Ideally you want to rehearse your construction before you go out to site and see where it goes wrong. So we were using technologies for AR, for example, to look at underground utilities. So that was one case study where you could take an iPad, take a tablet, or take a set of AR type goggles or glasses, look at the ground, and then demonstrate to the client, look, here's the complexity of the utilities that are under the ground. So you could visualize utilities underground. You could visualize the say train station that we're about to build. So people who are not technical, who can't read drawings or interpret, can very quickly see what's going to be there. A perfect case study was when you're developing a hospital or designing a hospital. A lot of people who are medical staff can't read 2D drawings. That's not how they've been brought up. So a surgeon can look at an emergency operating room, put on a set of VR goggles and have a look at how it's all laid out and say, no, I don't like this here. I think we need to move that over there. So we don't get to a point where we're about to build it and then we have to demolish it and redo it again. So those technologies really are great at bringing non-technical people into the world and get them to understand very early in the stage what we're going to build. And then we can adapt it and change it very quickly. There's a whole bunch of other technologies. And if we start talking about point clouds and how that's come about, and scanning and being able on a daily basis almost to monitor our construction sites, compare them against the design, and then change things. But yeah, the computing power is becoming more and more powerful, and a set of VR goggles now you can get for under $1,000. So it just opens that up to a whole new world. I know during COVID, we were using VR technology to basically walk through designs remotely, like sitting at our desk without being in the office. We could do a design meeting in a virtual environment, actually walking through the design and marking up. So those sort of technologies are there. But at the core, they rely on that information being set up so we could do that, good 3D models and good structured data. So that's what it comes back down to, is getting the underlying philosophy right so we can unlock all of these technologies that we want to use.
And we are close to the end, but before we go, I just want your take on where the industry goes next. You have seen, I think sometime looking at the past, you've seen the evolution of all of the changes you've been pushing in the last couple of decades. What gives you the most hope about where the industry is heading?
Well, what gives me the most hope? It's like going to our conference last week. It's just great to see some of the things people are doing. Like, there's some really talented people doing some great things. And I think we're now starting to get the transition. I think one of the exciting things is that what AI has done for us is open up this technology to people who aren't as technical. So when I say that, if we just take a piece of design software, Revit, ArchiCAD, whatever it might be, for a lot of people, it's quite daunting to open up those software packages. With AI, you don't have to have an understanding of any of these packages. You can just use natural language and say, go and design for me a building that has this, 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 and this. And in the background, the technology can do it for you. So those barriers are now being removed, where you don't have to be really technical. And that whole fear about wanting to open up a piece of software and be confused by all the icons and the UI, it just opens up all that technology now, where we can just use natural language and say, go and check the clashes on this building, or go and tell me where we are in the program. You don't have to know how to open up a schedule or open up an Excel spreadsheet or run a macro or all that sort of stuff. It makes all this technology accessible to everybody now. So I think AI will help transition our industry in terms of what's been holding us back. We've been one of the slowest adopting industries out of all the industries. I think we've got an opportunity now to be a leading industry and hopefully attract some more people into our industry from school and universities, that more people want to get into engineering and construction because of the excitement of what AI can do, and because there's so much opportunity here to adapt technology to. We're in a world where we need to build a lot of stuff to meet our growing population and all that sort of stuff. So that's what I'm hoping for the future, is that we drive now the technology forward to unlock efficiency and attract some more people into our industry, and really start to move forward. Yeah, it's exciting. There's lots of opportunity there. So yeah, get into engineering and construction.
Definitely very exciting, definitely. And thank you, Eric. We are really at the end of this episode. I've learned a lot. Thank you very much for your time. If people want to reach out to you, where can they find you?
Yeah, you can look me up on LinkedIn. So yeah, you'd find my contact details there. Just message me there. Or happy to provide my email address if we want to do that. But yeah, either go to the website through buildingSMART or through my own company, Kephron. Yeah, feel free to reach out, but mainly on LinkedIn. We'll provide the links. Always open to talk to people and spread the word.
Eric, thank you for joining us on the Digital Construction Podcast.
Thanks, Andrea. It's been a pleasure.